It's time now to take a look at what's in today's papers. We're joined by Tom Switzer, politics lecturer at the United States Study Centre at the University of Sydney. Good morning.
Miriam, Andrew.
And this morning we've got some news coming in regarding allegations about people smugglers and receiving payments from Australian border officials. It's taken a new turn this morning. We've seen an article in the Sun Herald where Indonesia's starting to ask questions now, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, Indonesia, of course, owes the Abbott government no favours after the recent diplomatic standoff over the execution of the Australian drug smugglers. Look, I am one of those who, broadly speaking, gives high marks to the Abbott government's border protection policies. I think you have to remember when Labor were in power under the Rudd, they overturned Howard's successful policy. The results were catastrophic. 50,000 unlawful boat arrivals, hundreds of deaths on the sea, and of course on top of that, public confidence had been shattered. Now, since Abbott's been in power, the boats have more or less stopped, deaths at the high sea have stopped, and public confidence has been restored. The problem now, though, is if this story is true, and these are just allegations, it does undermine public confidence, I think, because it shows that the government is prepared to pay people smugglers. The governments on both sides have called evil and vile and racking up all sorts of trouble. So it would be a problem. I suspect this is just a one-off, and the government, for obvious reasons, wants to keep it quiet, lest it whet the appetite of people smugglers who want to get paid.
but I mean, surely they would have known, if that news had got out, it would have spelt trouble, certainly as far as the Indonesians is concerned. I mean, the government's maintaining we won't comment on operational procedures, but I mean, if it is not the case, why not just deny it and move on?
Well, I suspect it's a one-off, and the government feels that if it does come out and confirm the story, then it will whet the appetite of the people smuggling racket. Indonesians may well be in on this, and they're just causing trouble, and you can see why. I mean, the relationship between Jakarta and Canberra has been really rock bottom. We don't even have an ambassador in Jakarta, largely over what I think was an exaggerated response to a terrible situation where Australians were executed, but ultimately this was a domestic sovereign matter for the Indonesians, and I think we've lost a lot of credibility in Jakarta because of our stance, and so they're playing hardball now.
Okay, well, let's have a look at what else has been in the papers this morning. And, of course, over in the US, your specialty, we've had Hillary Rodham Clinton speaking her first major speech, really, of her campaign to be president, and also the Democratic nomination. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves here. What did you make of that?
Well, look, she's entitled to be the favourite for both the Democratic nomination and, at this stage, the presidential race. But intriguingly, in the last 2 months, she's been very quiet. She's been hardly subjected to much media scrutiny. Her events have been very low-key. And this speech was really her first time she spoke out to the base of the party. And I think you have to remember the Democratic Party, just like the Republican Party, has become more polarising, more ideological in the last 10 years. And she's really appealing to this crowd. She did say she was a fighter and she stands for things. But intriguingly, nowhere in the speech did she take a stand on the contentious trade issues that are hurting her own president. And this is odd because she is the author of the so-called pivot to Asia. And here she is, she won't say anything because she doesn't want to upset the Liberal base, which is overwhelmingly opposed to free trade.
All right, we'll actually talk about the TPP in just a moment. But as far as the way she is painting herself in this campaign, I'm just looking at a headline here from CNN saying more Rodham, less Clinton. Is she trying to avoid being Clinton Mark II?
Well, that's a very good point. I think there's a lot of truth to be said for that, Andrew, because she wants to distinguish herself from her husband, who had, all things considered, a successful two-term presidency. But they were different times. When Bill Clinton was in power, it was about the Democratic Party triangulating its opponents on the left and on the right. The third way was the norm, centrist Democrats. What's happened in the last few years, as I mentioned earlier, is that the centre of political gravity in both parties has moved to their ideological fringes. So for her to really have resonance with the party's grassroots, she needs to talk their language. She needs to talk the language of Elizabeth Warren, the left-wing populist from Massachusetts. And that means getting tougher on Wall Street, getting tougher on free trade, and supporting an unashamedly progressive issue on a wide range of social issues.
I mean, she is in a very unusual position, being that she was First Lady. Yeah. She's also served in the government of President Barack Obama. So she really does have a lot of work to do in terms of establishing herself separately.
Well, indeed, although she's got the name recognition, you know, she's shorthand, Hillary for shorthand, it's a huge asset. It's a bit like being Sher, you know, everyone knows her by her first name. After President Obama, she's the most famous
I don't know that that's such a great comparison.
Well, but she has a lot of experience. She was a high-profile First Lady. She was a senator for New York, a Secretary of State, and now a presidential candidate, an accomplished author in her own right. So she's got a lot going for her. The two main problems for her, and she's trying to deal with this here, is can she be trusted? That's a legitimate issue because there have been a lot of clouds about her integrity and credibility. And also, can she resonate with Joe Sixpack on the campaign trail?
Well, you were talking about trade issues earlier, and that vexed question because obviously she's meant to be representing the workers in America.
Yeah.
Now, we've just seen the Trade-Pacific Partnership take a bit of a hit because Congress have a problem with it. Now, they were voting what it was specifically over compensation for workers that may lose their jobs if this goes through.
That's right. Well, the Washington Post editorial, which is a left or more liberal-leaning American paper, slams the Democrats for booby-trapping not just the president, but the Republicans who in good faith have been acting with the president. I mean, so often we've been told in Washington, and for understandable reasons, that it's those polarising partisan Republicans who are obstructing Obama's agenda. Well, on this occasion, the broad cross-section of the Republican Party, especially its leadership, were united with President Obama, and the Democrats opposed the Trade Promotion Authority, which gives the president to conduct trade deals like the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that includes Australia, without congressional amendments. Now, they didn't have the votes to scuttle the TPA vote, but what they did was attach to the TPA vote a separate bill that linked this issue about giving more money to workers who have lost their jobs. Now, they opposed that because they knew that was the only way they could sink TPA. Pretty ruthless politics on the Democrats' part, and Obama, quite understandably, is seeing this has been a huge blow for his credibility. Now, the Republicans will probably try to find a way of salvaging this legislation next week, but make no mistake, if this legislation does not get up next week, the Americans will not have TPA. The president will be the first president since Richard Nixon not to have TPA. Only one other president hasn't had TPA since the war, and this means he probably won't be able to have a free hand to negotiate the TPP, which means the TPP, which is the heart and soul of the pivot, is dead.
So how does he salvage it?
Well, he can't do much except try to convince some of these Democrats to support his legislation. Now, the problem here is his credibility and prestige are dramatically diminished, I think, in this debate because he hasn't spent the months and the years trying to reach out to the Democrats to win on this very issue. He just assumed that they would always support him because he was their president. But as I said before, the Democrat Party has moved to the left. They're very much against free trade, and they're repudiating not just Bill Clinton, but their own current president.
How much of this is a problem of being a lame-duck president in that it's 2 years to go, essentially? And I mean, is he, you know, today's saying, look, let's wait for the next person to come along?
Maybe. I mean, I think about George W. Bush when he was at this very point in mid-2007, 18 months before he had to pass the torch, and he wanted to get some contentious immigration policies through the Congress. The Republicans were not supporting their own president, but the Democrats ended up supporting Bush. So we can see a bit of this. This can happen, but the problem here is that Democrats, because they're so tied to organisational labour and a lot of the environmental groups, they don't want to have a bar of Obama at the moment.
Tricky times ahead. Tom Switzer.
You thought Canberra politics was dysfunctional.
Yes. We'll see a lot more from that, I think. Tom Switzer, thank you so much
Mary.
for joining
Andrew.
us. Thank you.